food or taking girls out or whatever. He had to spend it on the rent. So the soldier didn't care how much the rent was he paid, as long as it was less than the amount that they gave him. So what Simon realized was that in many places the rents were less than the amount the army gave you. So Simon rented the kind of house that soldiers could live in and charged them the exact amount that the army gave them for living for a month. And so he was able to, again, just take this information about this price difference. And what he did actually was he rented larger houses, and then he rented out the rooms in them to the soldiers for that amount that the soldiers were. And he was able to actually, it was ridiculous. He was able to rent, say, a house for $1,500 a month and get something like $4,500 from renting the rooms to the different soldiers per month, per house. And this was the beginning of his accumulating. He started renting a bunch of houses and he accumulated a lot of capital. And it was just the idea, just noticing this fact. The army gave the people this much. Soldiers didn't care how much that they spent because they couldn't use it for anything else. And that he could acquire the same space for less. Sort of a big success story. This is a sort of a classic American story, but it wraps into some other things. There was a poor immigrant family, because we're all immigrants. I can't remember where they're from, but there was a boy. His name was James Jerome Hill. And he started carrying people's bags around for them. And he lived in a town where there was a river section that was very rocky, and there was a business carrying people's things from one boat landing to the other. You couldn't boat up the river, so the boats would come here, stop, and then there were boats on the top that would go the rest of the way. They called this a portage. It was a portage business between the boat stops. He started carrying people's bags, and then he saved money, and he started getting horse carts and doing horse carts between there. And then he just grew his business of transportation. In the end, he got into the railroad business, and he became one of the biggest, most successful railroad tycoons in American history. And sort of an interesting part of the story is that he really understood business. And for him, it was all about transportation and growing his transportation business. There were other political entrepreneurs. It gets into some of the things that you were talking about. And in the United States, there was a time when we had California, and you had this big trip around the world to try to get to California, and everybody understood that whoever built a railroad first to connect all of America, across America, would have a huge, important business. This was like racing to be the first on the moon, or the Sputnik thing. That one of these races was a classic case of whoever got there first would win the big prize. And J.J. Hill understood that if you just put railroad track as fast as you can across the country, where there's no towns, no people, no customers, that it wasn't good business. You could get there first, but it wouldn't be a profitable business. But other people decided, oh no, we're going to be there first, we're going to race. And they went to the government, and they got all kinds of government land concessions and extra help from the government to establish the first railroad. So the first railroad that crossed the United States, the first transcontinental railroad, was called the Union Pacific. And when the two halves of it met together, it was in the state of Utah. And they famously hammered a gold railroad spike into the ground to join the railroads. And I imagine they must have put it out, put it in a museum later, because a gold railroad spike would not stay in the ground very long. But the gold spike and all this stuff and this big thing, the Union Pacific they won the race. They were the first ones there. But what happened? Within 3 years, the company was bankrupt. Because they went so fast, they did a number of technical errors. They had many of the hills were too steep, and it was inefficient for the engines to go up. Some of the curves were too sharp. Didn't cause accidents, but the rails would wear out faster. And so they had more costs of replacing them. And most important, they had no customers along the way. They had this huge railroad going zoom across these empty spaces where there was nothing but Indians attacking them. And they were out of business in 3 years. J.J. Hill, he did it more slowly, and he gave people, he's an evil capitalist. He gave people cows, seeds, farming equipment, to begin building farming communities. He would build his railroad another 50 miles, give people a bunch of land and cows and stuff, and they'd form a town. Now he had a town that needed his railroad to transport the things they grew and the cows and so on. And he did that all the way across the country. And that company is still in business. Main points. J.J. Hill, did he start with a bunch of money? He was even more starving than my poor Belarusian carpet starving college students. All he started with was just work, just carrying as a kid, carrying people's bags in the portage along the river.